understand it. They turned around and they said, look, you got to mobilize a community to become producers. Okay? As many folks that didn't like Booker T and didn't like Washington.
Booker T. Washington.
Booker T. Booker T had something as he talked about teaching people how to work with their hands. You can have a piece of paper in your hand and talk about you got a degree, but if you can't produce nothing, you're in trouble. So I think it's a combination of things. All right, let me show you this. 29:4. Now, I'm really trying to build on some of what you said. A prophet begins to interpret what they see and help people thrive and survive according to the covenant of God. Listen to it. In 29:4, let me know when you're there.
Yeah.
Thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, to the whole community which I exile. Who exile?
I.
Who is the I?
God.
From Jerusalem to Babylon. Build houses and live in them, plant gardens and eat their fruit. Take wives and beget sons and daughters, and take wives for your sons, and give your daughters to husbands, that they may bear sons and daughters. Multiply there, do not decrease, and seek the welfare of the city to which I have exiled you, and pray to the Lord in its behalf. For in its prosperity you shall prosper.
Do not.
In other words, he's telling them get to living. They got to dig, they got to plant, they got to grow. They can't just stop.
Right.
You got to live and survive, because remember what I told y'all, all we do is go 29:11 and don't read 10. It's 70 years you're going to be there. All you got to do is read it.
Yeah.
You ain't got to interpret it. If you just want to do a literal understanding, then I'm going to come. For I know the plans that I have for you. But when you look at this first part, he said, look, you got to get to living, and you got to carve out within inside of this plan of God a way of fulfilling God's plan and purpose by living. And here comes this other part. Keep looking. For thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, let not the prophets and diviners in your midst deceive you. And pay no. That's what's got us.
Right.
That's what's got us, is that these other folks are giving us a contradictory message that's telling us, hey, we ain't going to be here long. We're not going to be here. We're not. Let me tell you what your ancestors would say. Let me tell you what your ancestors would say. Hope for the best, plan for the worst.
Yep.
That's right.
What's he telling them? Hope for the best,
plan for the worst.
go to work. That's what he's telling them. But what's our churches telling them? Oh,
there's no lack in the kingdom.
Yeah, right.
For I know the plans that I have for you, concerning you, declares the Lord. Plans for your, not for your, to give you, that's all we do. What happens when God's plan is for you to carve out where you are? And it's not going to be pretty.
We want pretty.
We lazy. That's why I said a part of that message has to begin to talk about us taking accountability and carving it out. Because if you listen to that last part, this is what he said. Let me go back. Look at verse 7. And seek the welfare of the city. You mean the folks where they got me in bondage?
Yeah.
You mean the folks where they got me in slavery? Yes. Seek the welfare by producing and by doing this, to which I have exiled you, and pray to the Lord in his behalf, for in its prosperity you will prosper.
And the reason why I say because, living in Atlanta, well, I've been homeless, I've lived in the car, I've done the whole 9 yards of being here. But living in the shelter, what I have noticed, one thing that the director said is the last thing they want is another church to come in.
Right.
That's right.
That's what they have constantly in the shelters. You hear 5,000 different preachers come in to give you a word. Okay, but they do not have anyone that come in to the shelters that's actually bringing something that's more applied theology.
That's it.
Okay, so how do you apply this?
Right.
Now, how do you teach your people
Right.
to come out of this? You do not have the intellect to say that you are sitting in a system of bureaucracy, then you won't come out
No.
of that.
No.
And so that's what when I talk about the global church, what is it doing? How are we teaching our people not to? Most of what you see is a manipulation of the system when you're in there.
Right.
And that's what you constantly see, because it's a constant shuffle of people. It's never the same people. It's a constant shuffle of people in and out of the shelter system, because in that system, when you're in there, if you are not moving towards doing something to economically come out on your own, you will be stuck in that level of bondage and end up in a circle where you're constantly coming back to the shelter.
Yeah.
And that's basically how the resources are set up. The resources are set up to keep the people in the shelters and to keep the people, living in that level of bondage. And because of how they do the resources, they count their numbers of how many people they have. And if they're not full, they lose their shelter.
They lose revenue for that shelter. That's one of the things that your ancestor, Dr. G. Woodson, said. He said this. He said, look. He said, never expect the people who put you in the ghetto to get you out of the ghetto, because they benefit from you.
That's right.
Be very clear about that.
Of course.
And I think a part of it is not just with the shelters as much as it is with the churches, that we anesthetize people so that they are controllable. Because we don't want to empower them, because if we empower them, they'll see our foolishness.
And then we move on.
Here we go. This is a poem. I want y'all to get this. Isaiah 2:2. Isaiah 2.
And 2.
Yeah. I'm gonna come back. I'm gonna come back to 1, but I still want to get. You know what? I need to start with. No, I start with 2. 2. And 1 down. We're gonna start picking some of these up, because again, as we start talking about some of this stuff, we got to deal with it in political framework as well as spiritual. And now, when I say spiritual, you got to really stop and take a look at what does he mean by spirituality. Spirituality is not just this feeling as much as it is concepts and perceptions that guide your worldview, how you think, how you make your choices, how you make your decisions. That, as Malcolm X would say, propels you. That's what'll move you. Okay? Does that make sense?
Exactly.
Okay? Here we go. The word that Isaiah, son of Amoz, prophesied concerning Judah and Jerusalem. In the days to come, the mount of the Lord's house shall stand firm above the mountains, and tower above the hills, and all the nations shall gaze on it with joy. And the many peoples shall go and say, come, let us go up to the mount of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may instruct us in his ways, and that we may walk in
His people.
for instruction shall come forth from the word of the Lord, from okay. Now, the mount of the Lord's house is what we call the Temple Mount. All right? So we're talking about the Temple Mount. All right? Now, what then are we talking about here? Why would people be rejoicing about this temple being where it is? It's in there, folks. Here it is. Verse 3. Let us go to the mount of